All right, now we're on to fluids. Fluids follows minerals beautifully because if you consider the electrolytes flow freely in our fluid to maintain homeostasis of the human body. When we're talking about water for the human body, approximately 60% of body weight for men is water, whereas women are about 55%. What do you think the difference is? Why is it that men are on average about 5% higher in water weight? It really has to do with the physiology and functionality of the body. Men typically contain greater muscle mass. Muscle mass is a wet mass. Secondly, women have a higher fat mass. Fat mass instigates hormones, which is then necessary for babies. 75 to 80% of the brain and the muscle is water. And actually, another interesting thing to take into consideration, the ratio of glycogen to water is 1 to 3. So I think that's kind of cool. And 25% of our bones are water. Yes, I said it. Our bones. Is that crazy cool? When I said earlier in the sodium part, I said that your bones are fluid. They're alive, they're moist. I was not kidding. A quarter of the bone weight is water. Other just fun things to know is that babies, when they're first born, they're about 78% water, and that drops down to about 65% by the time they're 1 year of age. So kind of crazy little facts. You will, if you go online, you'll see different numbers, but I sorted through everything and I felt that this was about the best average. There's always going to be variations depending on the individual in terms of muscle mass, head size, etc. All right, there are 4 roles of fluids. The first one is solvent. Solvent meaning to dissolve or distribute. So whenever you eat your nutrition is transported via your blood. It is a solvent. Your solute is the nutrients, and the blood is the solvent, the fluid-based delivery system. For cleansing agent, if you think about it, water helps clean the body. It is actually the ultimate in terms of detoxing. When you urinate, that's your body cleansing itself. For you to be able to successfully defecate, to poop, folks, you have to have fluid in there to keep things fluid and moving. For your muscles, you want to be able to work out lactic acid from working out intensively. You need fluid to help deliver that so that it can be discharged from the body. As a lubricant and cushion, what are we trying to lubricate? Think of the human body. Every time you blink your eyes, you're lubricating your eyes. When you eat foods, you have saliva in your mouth. That's lubricating your mouth. Or what if you have a cold and you have a nasal drip? That's your body's effort, folks. It's intentional. It's lubricating the membranes in an effort to try to discharge the infection. Your body also utilizes water as a cushion. That could be something as simple as your spinal cord, or the cushion could be for your joints. Or think of it in terms of amniotic fluid for a baby, cushioning a baby. Lastly, fluids serve as a coolant for the human body to help us regulate our body temperature. So the hotter we are, the more we sweat in an effort to reduce that core temperature and prevent heat stroke. All right, this is just a little review for you guys. All right, when we experience dehydration, folks, our blood will become more concentrated, thicker, stickier, slower. Our organs will be impaired as they lose fluid. Think of like that apricot. It'll become dehydrated and dimple. Well, your organs kind of experience something slightly similar. They'll start to pucker. They won't be as functional. When we're dehydrated, we don't have enough fluid in our intestinal tract to keep things moving smoothly, and that increases the likelihood of constipation. So, if you're one of those people who experiences constipation frequently, please make sure that you're drinking water consistently on a regular basis. Muscle dysfunction, because obviously, if your muscles aren't able to achieve their 75 to 80% fluid rate, then they are going to be less functional and more susceptible to tears, other damage. Think of me when lecturing. Oh my gosh, I would do so much talking, but my respiration, my speaking, and my breathing through my mouth I would lose a lot of fluid, more than the average person. And the result of this would be, or is, a dry mouth. When we're very dehydrated, folks will start to experience nausea, discomfort, upset stomach, fatigue, low energy. Part of it's because our muscles, our brain, our body is not optimized. As the brain becomes dehydrated, we could experience headaches or have a hard time thinking clearly, forgetfulness. And that, I can tell you, when I'm lecturing, when I get dehydrated, comes in. And when I would trip over my words, it was dehydration. When we are dehydrated, depending on if it's long-term or short-term, a person could be hypotensive, meaning the heart slows down, or long-term dehydration, the heart will speed up and the person will become hypertensive. Things that will contribute to dehydration, well, caffeine, because it's a diuretic, alcohol, because it interferes with the communication system of the brain, the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland to the kidneys. Sugar, because of the high solute load of sugar in our blood, will promote the body's desire to try to discharge the sugar, and hence more frequent urination. We call that something like polyuria, especially in the case of diabetes. Diuretics, that would be things like NoDoz or Vivarin that people take, caffeine-based pills to keep themselves awake. Or when we're in really high humidity and heat, this will promote the body's efforts to adjust its body temperature, and that will interfere with hydration status. So think of your body as like a nice perky tomato plant. Your leaves are stretched out, you're standing up tall and firm. But when we become dehydrated, we start to droop. We droop in body language and in thought process. Hey, and something to keep in mind regarding a headache, it's kind of a little bit of a challenge, but it's not just dehydration. If you recall back to the carbohydrates section, I mentioned that when you are short on carbohydrates, for some people, they experience headaches when their brain is not able to perform optimally. Okay, effects of dehydration. Well, the majority of us are probably at around a 2% body weight loss. And that's where you're going to see things like the dry mouth. But the longer we are dehydrated, or the quicker, the more intense it is, this is what can then impact things like our energy, impact our mental functioning. And as we that increases, we're progressing from a 2% weight loss to a 5% weight loss. What do I mean by the weight loss? Well, let's put it this way. When you go to the health club and you exercise, we call it a weight differential. When you exercise, the weight you are before you exercise and the weight you are afterwards are not based on calories you burned. It's purely water weight loss. So that difference between what you started and what you ended with is how much fluid you lost while you were exercising. So please, number one, when you exercise, keep an eye on what your weight is. Always hydrate before, during, and after effectively, because when we become closer to a severe dehydration state where a person becomes very confused, disoriented, it impacts their pace of breathing. Their pulse starts to become now rapid. This, folks, is inching them very quickly and closely to the possibility of going into a coma or death, which is only at about a 7% body weight loss. 7% is not a big number. So think of it this way. If you weigh 200 pounds, that's 14 pounds of water weight loss. And when you hit that all at once without hydrating effectively, the whole body can shut down and fail. There's other side effects to people who are chronically dehydrated, and what that would be is, kidney stones, as we said, the constipation, the hypertension. As I said, it has to be chronic versus hypotension when it's short term. And then things like gallstones, concentration of fats in the gallbladder. When we overheat inside the body, that's referred to as heat stroke. It's typically going to come up every summer when it's hot out or possibly humid. Just watch the news in LA. This is a situation where a person is unable to effectively cool off. We want to consider it'll be expressed, as we said before, the things like the headache, the nausea, the vomiting. So think in terms of like the cross-country runners that we talked about earlier. When they are running and they're low in electrolytes, they're also low in fluid. And this is part of the mechanism. Their body will start experiencing nausea or vomiting in an effort to raise awareness of itself that it's severely dehydrated, low in its nutrients. The muscle cramps, as I said, not just electrolytes, but also fluid, or it could be all of the above. But there are 4 groups of people, cohorts, who are most likely to experience heat stroke. And my question for you is, who would that be? Think for a moment about it. Who would be most susceptible to situations or environments that would promote fluid loss and increase the incidence of heat stroke? Well, what do you think? Overheated. Construction workers, yeah, that would be a great example. These are people who work outdoors. They may or may not have water beside them, depending on the site they're on. And in addition, oftentimes they're working directly in the heat, so they can become overheated and dehydrated. What about senior citizens? Senior citizens do not have muscle mass typically. If they don't have muscle mass, they don't have a reservoir of any fluid that's retained, which means their body has an inability to cool off. They will become overheated much quicker. So folks, in the summertime when you watch the news, the people most likely to experience heat stroke are our senior citizens. Okay, also on that list, athletes. Because oftentimes when athletes are exercising, especially outdoors or with gear, think of football players, they're carrying around a lot of equipment. They're hot, they're overheated, they're distracted, they push themselves, or maybe they feel intimidated to tell a coach that they're not getting enough fluids. We had an incident a few years ago where a middle schooler was in a soccer tournament in Westminster and playing, and he was out on the field. And he kept wanting to come in, didn't explain why, but the coach kept saying, no, stay out there, you're doing great. And he did, until he collapsed. He experienced heat stroke on the field and he died. He hit that 7% dehydration rate. We can't recover from that, folks. The human body has to have water, has to maintain homeostasis. And your 4th group to take into consideration are going to be your children and especially your infants. Small children, folks, because number 1, they don't have experience and they don't yet have the full power of language and understanding combined to say, hey, I'm thirsty, I need a glass of water. They're not there yet. They're not in a position where they comfortably assert themselves when they're very small. Typically, there's always that crazy child. Or babies. Babies have no muscle mass. Small children have very little muscle mass. Babies have no communication, and they are really at the discretion of the adults. So think about it also in the summertime when you hear about kids locked in cars and dying. I mean, it's pitiful and it's ridiculous it happens, but the reality is, if you really think about it, how easy is it to get distracted? I can visualize it in my mind, and I totally get it. Mom's in a rush, baby's asleep, she just drives up to the grocery store, she leaves baby in the car thinking, I'm just going to run in and get diapers or just run in and get milk. And she runs in, but as she runs in, maybe she runs into someone she knows. Maybe she can't find what she's looking for and she's got to find an employee to help her. Maybe the grocery store line is really long. Oh my gosh, like Costco right now. The line is really long and she can't get through it expeditiously. And can I tell you, the thing about California people at the checkout stand, they all talk about their little dogs. And they take forever. When I moved here from back east, it was like, oh my God, can you just hurry and pay and leave? But no, they have to take their time. They have to enjoy the shopping experience. Yeah. Okay, so it takes a lot longer than she expects. And then what if she goes to use her ATM card and the machine's down or it's really slow? In that time that she's gone, the car heats up in the summertime. The baby can come to a critical temperature internally and slip into a coma and die. Her efforts were never intended to cause this, but her carelessness, not of being too long in the grocery store, no, but the carelessness of another human life, no. She should have kept that baby with her at all times. We don't leave children unattended. So something to take into consideration going forward in life, whether child or animal, they are never to be left alone in the car. If you see this, you have to make a judgment call. One, if it's not too hot, call the police and report it and stay there. Or two, if it's hot out, break the window. Okay? Because that may be the difference between that child growing up to be an adult versus that child dying. Another story I have for you is that if any of you are familiar with this, a few years ago, a UCI professor had taken his child in the minivan, was supposed to take him to daycare. And the professor got distracted and he drove straight to school, to UCI, and went and lectured and did his research and office hours and all whatever it was he was doing. And he forgot about the child. And the child was in the back of the minivan, sound asleep. So he didn't notice the child when he drove to work and got out and went into his office. Child was out there all day in the heat. The child cooked internally. There is no recovery from that. All right, what does a fluid imbalance look like? Well, there's two ways. One is overconsumption intentionally. This is referred to as internal drowning, when we drink too much water too fast. When that happens, it over-dilutes the sodium in our blood and we become hyponatremic, which means that we cannot be effective at the sodium-potassium pump and stimulating electrical impulses. When this happens, the hypotension then reduces the response by the heart, which means the blood flow is slower, impacts human life. On the other hand, we can end up over-retaining fluids, which also disrupts the homeostasis of the human body, promoting high blood pressure, otherwise known as hypertensive. This, folks, is from an overconsumption of sodium, which is why I have grave concerns looking at your DAP when your sodium count is really high. When a person does not have enough protein in their diet, the fluid in their vessels will leak out into the interstitial space. And if there's not enough sodium to retain it, then that, folks, would be edema. Congestive heart failure, over retention of fluids over time can impact the structure and functionality of the heart. Chronic kidney disease, same idea, where you have got the body is making an effort, the kidneys, to clean the blood, and it's filtering a lot of blood, and the more fluid there is, the harder the kidneys have to work. Now, inverse, you got to remember, too much equals not enough, which means that if you are dehydrated, your kidneys have to work really hard because then the solute load in your blood is more concentrated. So whenever you disrupt the homeostasis of the human body, it's a lose-lose situation. And then lastly, medications. Some medications actually just do not agree with our body, and they can promote things like fluid retention, like the pill, or hormone replacement therapy, or NSAIDs like aspirin or steroids. Some medications actually cause us to discharge our fluids and promote dehydration. So we have to be cautious of that whenever we take medications to ask. To balance our fluids, folks, well, how do we do this? The body does it automatically. Our hypothalamus up in our brain constantly receives transmissions, communications about the status of the human body. When the hypothalamus gets a message that there's too much solute load, then the body will release hormones to the kidneys. Well, the hormones go from the pituitary gland. The hypothalamus will message the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland will release hormones, dispense them to go down to the kidneys and tell the kidneys, hey, open the floodgates, let the fluid out because we have too much solute. Or it might be that on the inverse is that your kidneys say, your hormones are delivered to your kidneys saying, no, keep the fluid. Our solute load is too light, too thin, and then your body will retain fluid and solute. When we do discharge our fluids, folks, that is referred to as sensible loss. Urine is sensible because we can count it, measure it, whereas insensible loss is going to be that which we cannot measure, your sweat, your respiration, or your feces. When do we need additional fluid? Well, when we're sick, we have diseases, coughing, sneezing. These are ways, sweating, we're losing fluids. Medications, as I said, that cause us to discharge fluid prematurely. When we are in extreme heat, the body's efforts to adjust its temperature, it'll sweat more. When we're in airplanes, that's canned air, folks. Plus, you're at a very high altitude that's incredibly dry. It's a double whammy that's going to really impact your body's ability to maintain homeostasis. That being said, whenever you fly on an airplane, the longer the distance, the greater amount of water your body's going to need. So think of it this way. You want to drink that day a liter before you get on the plane, and a liter afterwards, and a liter on the plane. So if you're about to get on the airplane, you know the airport will not let you take water in. So you take a bottle of water that's empty, go in on the other side, and then use the filling station to refill it. Hey, save some money that way. And then you want to make sure that you drink at least a liter on the airplane. If you're flying cross country to the East Coast, folks, or further, you really should have at least 2 liters because you're going to lose all of it through your skin and breathing. Women during the perinatal period, all around the pregnancy period, they are going to need a greater amount of fluid to support the amniotic fluid and to support breast milk production. In physical activity, when we exercise, we sweat, we need additional water above and beyond the normal range. And our dietary intake. If you are consuming a diet rich in fruits and vegetables that have high water content, then yeah, you're getting some of your water that way. But if you insist on not including any living produce in your diet, then that will promote a lower hydration status in the body, because if not, you have to compensate by drinking more water. All right, how much water do we need? Well, a few things to take into consideration. First of all, on average, women need about 9 cups a day, or around 2 liters a day, and men need about 13 cups a day, or 3 liters a day. That number is really dependent on the person's dietary intake. As I said, the more you exercise, the fluid intake is going to increase. The more exposure you have to hot weather or to dry weather, the more fluid you're going to need. Whereas if you're eating a lot of living foods, fruits, vegetables with water in them, then you actually, and it's really more so vegetables, folks, because they don't have the sugar in them, then that means that you don't have to drink as much. If you recall, 1,000 milliliters on the right side is 1 liter. All right, where are we getting our water from? Well, water, duh, okay. Herbal teas is another option, and then fruits and vegetables. Folks, nothing else. That's it. All right. What is our goal color-wise to achieve in terms of fluid? We want a light lemonade color. That's the very top color. Because a light lemonade color indicates that you are well hydrated, but you have some solute load to deliver, but not a lot. When you get into the next color down, the golden yellow, that would be a reflection of someone who's very dehydrated. Their urine is quite concentrated. When the urine becomes more of like a neon yellow, that would be a person who has an overconsumption of B vitamins, most likely from drinking coffee. No harm, no foul. It's just a chemical reaction and they become neon and are discharged. Because why? They're a water-soluble vitamin. When a person has that amber color, that's extreme dehydration, folks, or consideration of the beginning of a kidney disease, and they need to get on top of water pronto. When a person gets actually more into cloudy colors, that also would be a concern for kidney disease, or if their urine is going to be a reddish, brownish brick color, then hello, that was blood, that would be kidney stones. That's when life goes sideways. So it's very good to self-monitor your urine colors to identify the health status of your body and how to protect it. So water. What kind of waters are out there? Well, we've got hard water and soft water. What kind of water do you think we have here in Orange County? Yeah. I'll tell you, if it leaves a residue on the shower wall, on the tile, on the curtain, it's hard water. And there's a heck of a lot of hard water here, I'll tell you. On the other hand, soft water, that would be a place like Portland, Oregon, or if a person has water filtration system. Our water officially is overseen by our local government, municipal water supply system. The federal government is in charge of the EPA, but that's on a grand scale and not on day-to-day management. And this is important to consider when you think about places like Flint, Michigan, where they have a lot of lead leaching into their water. It's because those pipes are so darn old, folks. It's a lower income community. They don't have a lot of revenue for the government, which means they don't have the finances to be able to address that problem. Yet at the same time, it's not the responsibility of the federal government that has bigger fish to fry, no pun intended. Therefore, we're in a quandary. Is how do we ensure people have clean water in communities that do not have the tax revenue to support the infrastructure? I don't have an answer to that necessarily, but that's something important to ponder. Safety of water in developing nations, no, there's no oversight, folks, and it is highly dangerous. Always take that into consideration when you travel internationally, not to drink other people's water. We're not used to their microbes, and it will give you either traveler's diarrhea or you'll get severely sick. Developing nations, wow. Well, statistically, let's think of it this way. Every single day that you wake up, past, present, and future, 25,000 people a day in developing nations will die from unclean water. 25,000 people. It's a scary number and an incredibly sad number, but it's a factual one, folks. So please think outside the box. If you have an amazing idea of how to manage our water supply, whether it be here so we don't waste so much, or in another country where you can help someone, that is incredibly powerful. All right, other considerations for water, the sources. If it's surface water, folks, I have a golden rule. If it's not moving, don't go into it. It is going to be a feeding frenzy for lovely little pathogens, whether it be bacteria, parasites, you name it, amoeba, things that can swim up inside of you in your water. We have had incidences of flesh-eating bacteria contracted from still water, swamp-type waters. Just not a good source. You got to think of it as being dead water, danger zone, cross and skulls, crossbone skulls, whatever. All right, just be cautious of surface water. Groundwater, on the other hand, companies like Poland Springs, Crystal Geyser, they tout the benefits of their water coming from the ground, and that's nice, but you have to take into consideration the safety and the quality of the land around the water. Go back in time, there's an old movie called Civil Action, John Travolta, about suing the Foster Grant Sunglass Company because they were dumping chemicals into streams outside their factories, and the chemicals would seep down through the layers of earth into the groundwater supply that the people used. They used wells for their water. And when they did, they were exposed to highly carcinogenic materials, which induced the craziest cancers of people of all ages. A more recent movie out here on the West Coast was the story of Erin Brockovich. Same scenario. Industry was dumping toxic waste, and it seeped down through the ground into the groundwater, and then the people were developing these horrific cancers. So water is vital for life, and clean water, is diminishing rapidly on our planet. We can't rely just on desalination plants along the ocean, because those actually make the surrounding waters even higher in saline content and toxic for any living plants and critters in the water. So that's a little bit self-defeating. What we really need to do is focus on getting back to the facts, which is number one, are we over-consuming water? Two, are we wasting it? Leaving showers running nonstop, sprinkling systems that are watering uncontrollably and flooding the streets. If you think about it in terms of any natural reservoirs around the world, there are no free water reservoirs left anymore. They've all been privately bought up and held, which means someday in the future, if we run out of water, we have nowhere to go. Nothing. It's a disturbing thought. Okay, that's it for your fluids section.